The story begins with a high school student named Ji-won who is protesting the unfair dismissal of one of her teachers. Moments later, her classmate Ki-jun arrives and warns her that it will rain soon, but she tells him to mind his own business. It turns out that these two were childhood friends and used to be quite close, but they no longer get along and often argue. Later during sports class, Ki-jun notices his crush So Young and decides to impress her with his skills. With excitement, he proceeds to jump, but is startled when he notices some of the Taekwondo students approaching. Due to this, he falls embarrassingly, and other students begin laughing at him. It turns out that he used to practice Taekwondo, but stopped when he injured his ankle. Even though it's now completely healed, he lacks the confidence to return since he believes he's not good enough. Following this, Ki-jun leaves the school to visit the grave of his friend Min. He sets a flower on his grave and tells Min that he quit Taekwondo. Just as Ki-jun walks away, another boy named Young-ju arrives at the grave with flowers. However, the two do not cross paths. The following day, a new transfer student arrives in class, and he turns out to be Young-ju. Ki-jun approaches his old friend and tries to strike up a conversation. However, for some reason, Young-ju lashes out at him and calls him a murderer. Later in class, the students are talking about the new guy, and one of them claims that he was caught doing illegal dealings with gangsters. This frightens Ji-won, causing her to accidentally spill some glue on a chair. To her shock, Young-ju suddenly arrives and sits on it, but she lacks the courage to say anything. Later, when he tries to stand up, he is unable to do so. He eventually forces himself free, but ends up tearing his pants and spends the rest of the day walking around like that. Meanwhile, Ji-won heads to the burger joint where she worked. To her surprise, she finds Ki-jun there, and the owner informs her that he is their new recruit. Since our girl has been selected for a new internship and will leave soon, the owner tells her to train Ki-ju as a replacement before she leaves. Afterward at home, Ji-won is hounded by her mother who belittles her for working at a burger joint. She mostly takes it, but when mom mocks her passion for carpentry, she gets pissed. Frustrated, she goes out and tries to distract herself by playing a claw machine. When she's unable to get a stuffed animal, she begins to cry and kick the machine. Just then, Young-ju, who is in charge of refilling the stuffed animals, arrives. They recognize each other from school, and he asks why she's so angry. Before leaving, he hands her a teddy bear, which makes her smile. The next evening, we see Ji-won and Ki-jun at the burger joint. When he struggles with the cooking, she helps him and shows off her culinary skills. Later, he notices a wound on her elbow and applies a bandage to it. This reminds him of a childhood memory when he was treating her wound, and she suddenly kissed him. In the next scene, Ji-won begins her internship, and at first, everything goes well. But after only a few days, she becomes dissatisfied. The manager assigns her a shit ton of unnecessary work that she is learning nothing from. So one day, she finally complains to her manager about it, claiming that she's not being assigned the tasks they had agreed to. However, the asshole just scolds her and tells her to do whatever he tells her to. Frustrated, Ji-won goes to an internet cafe and writes a lengthy rant about her manager, which she posts on social media. The next day at school, she is summoned by her teachers, who scold her and demand that she delete the post. However, she refuses and says she will not return to that place. After school, Ji-won and her friends head to a restaurant where the friends begin gossiping about Young-ju. Surprisingly, he turns out to be their server, as his family runs the restaurant. Moments later, Ki-jun also arrives with his friends, which enrages Young-ju. He attempts to tell him to leave, but his brother Jeong stops him. The following evening, Ji-won starts a part-time job at a supermarket. During this, she comes across Young-ju, who is there to restock the claw machine. She greets him and invites him to stay for a while. While they eat noodles, he asks her about why she left her internship, and she replies that the manager was very toxic. She then asks him why he hates Ki-jun so much, but he doesn't answer her. She realizes that she asked him a sensitive question, so she quickly apologizes to him. The next day, Ki-jun is in the library when he notices his crush, So Young, being bothered by some guy. He tries to intervene, but the sassy girl says she doesn't need his help and walks away. In the evening, Ki-jun goes to his locker and discovers an anonymous letter that reads, "I ate pasta today." Later, he shows it to his boss, who reveals that it's a new trend on social media. This sentence is generally used by someone who wants to end their life. Ki-jun then notices a small symbol at the end of the letter, which is similar to the ones Ji-won used to make in elementary school. Panicked, he rushes to her house and finds her on the rooftop. Assuming that she might be trying to end her life, Ki-jun then shows her the letter, but she denies writing it and says that due to the widespread knowledge of the trend, anyone could have written it. The two then brainstorm and conclude that the girl who wrote the letter must have a crush on Ki-jun, since she left it for him. So the next day at school, they ask a lot of girls if they like him. However, every single one of them replies with a resolute no. They also try to speak with their teachers, but they are all too busy preparing for the visit from their school director, Gumi. Shortly after, Ji-won goes to the locker room to pick up her stuff. There, she notices her friend Minsu's locker, which has the same symbol as the letter. She recalls that Min-soo used to work with her as an intern, and she had been acting strange the last few days. The second our heroine connects the dots, something falls from the rooftop, startling everyone in the school. They soon discover that a flower pot fell from the roof and wrecked Director Gumi's car. It turns out that Young Ju, who hates the director for some reason, threw the pot on purpose. So Young, who had also been studying on the roof, saw this and suddenly asks him to date her. However, he ignores her and walks away. Meanwhile, Ji-won believes that Min-soo has jumped off the rooftop, but she is relieved to discover that it was just a flower pot. Following this, she informs Ki-jun that the suicide note could be from Min-soo, and the two begin looking for her. At the same time, Director Gumi discovers that her car has been destroyed, making her furious. She then leaves in another car, but not before ordering the teachers to find the offender as soon as possible. Later on, Ji-won calls Min-soo's workplace and discovers that she hasn't shown up for a few days. Meanwhile, Young Ju is on his way home when he notices Min-soo wandering on the beach. However, he doesn't think much of it and leaves. After a while, he remembers Ji-won talking about the suicide note, so he gives her a call. He lets her know that he saw Min-soo near the beach some time ago. Hearing this, she frantically asks him to find her as soon as possible. In the next scene, we see Min-soo on a bridge thinking about jumping into the ocean. It turns out a few days ago she accidentally broke an artifact while working. Due to this, the manager became extremely angry and demanded 30 million won from her. Min-soo explained that she didn't have that kind of money, but the manager threatened to involve the police if she didn't comply. This situation has made her feel like there is no other way out. But just before she can make such a drastic decision, Young Ju arrives and stops her. He consoles her, saying that there are people who care about her and can help her. Not long after, Ji-won arrives with Ki-jun and one of the teachers. The girls hug each other and Min-soo explains her predicament. The teacher assures her that she'll talk to the manager and work something out. The next day at school, Director Gumi is still pissed about her car. So Young takes advantage of the situation and sends Young Ju a video of him throwing the flower pot. Later they meet during a break, where she threatens to expose him unless he does what she says. She explains that a lot of guys are bothering her and she just wants Young Ju to pretend to be her boyfriend so they'll leave her alone. Having no other option, he reluctantly agrees to be her faux bae. The next day, the news spreads that the two are a couple. So Young shares pictures on social media, and they show up at school holding hands. Meanwhile, the officials are still looking for the person who threw the flower pot. The head teacher goes to the rooftop and finds a keyring. So he calls Ji-won and Ki-jun and another student to his office. He then shows them the Taekwondo-themed keyring and asks who it belongs to. Ki-jun knows that it belongs to Young Ju, but surprisingly, he claims it as his. Hearing this, the teacher dismisses the other two students and expels Ki-jun. Soon after, the news about his expulsion circulates throughout the school and eventually reaches Young Ju. That night, Young Ju shows up at Ki-jun's work and angrily asks him why he's taking the blame, but Ki-jun stays silent. Defiant, Young Ju says he will confess tomorrow and leaves. Later, he returns home and stares at his brother Jeong, who is paralyzed due to an accident. After the accident, Director Gumi visited the hospital and offered her sympathies. You see, Jeong worked for Director Gumi and got hurt while on the job. A few days later, Young Ju and his mother approached Director Gumi looking for compensation for his injuries. However, she refused to help them and called them beggars. Back in the present, Young Ju is left fuming after recalling the incident. He then texts So Young, saying he's going to tell the truth about the flower pot, therefore, he won't be her faux bae anymore. The next day, Young Ju goes to the principal's office to confess. To his surprise, he finds another student claiming that she was on the rooftop and accidentally knocked over the flower pot. Since she is the niece of Director Gumi, she is excused without any consequences. Seeing this, Young Ju tries to intervene, but he is stopped by So Young. She tells him to grow up and think about his family and what a criminal record would mean. It turns out So Young forced the girl to lie by threatening to reveal evidence of her cheating in exams. When Director Gumi learns that her niece accidentally caused the flower pot incident, she had no choice but to forgive her. The next day, the students go on a field trip where they are entertained by a dancing panda. Everyone rushes to take photos with the panda, causing its head to accidentally fall off. To their shock, the panda turns out to be their classmate, Yun-bai. She was in the running to be part of a K-pop group, but didn't make it through the final rounds. Exposed, she quickly leaves in embarrassment. That evening, while So Young is walking home, Yun-bai approaches her in tears. She says that she's too embarrassed to go back to school and asks her what she should do. When So Young coldly tells her to accept it and move on, Yun-bai walks away in a huff. The following day at school, Yun-bai becomes the target of ridicule from her classmates. During class, So Young is assigned to evaluate her homework, and she bluntly points out her mistakes. A defensive Yun-bai angrily reveals how So Young doesn't have a family and has been living in an orphanage since childhood. However, her actions only result in more ridicule from her friends, who can't believe she would insult someone over such things. Frustrated, she begins crying and runs out of school. Later, So-young receives numerous calls from Yeonbai's mother. Eventually, she answers, and the mom reveals that she hasn't been able to reach her daughter. So-young then goes to an amusement park where she finds Yeonbai sitting alone and crying. It turns out the two used to be close friends, but had a falling out. So-young tells her that the past can't be changed. They can't dwell on the fact that she's an orphan and Yeonbai was rejected. All they can do is move forward. The two girls then apologize to each other and reconcile. That evening, So-young goes back to the orphanage and gazes at a picture of Young-ju with the kids. She then remembers that 2 months prior, some volunteers arrived at the orphanage with some gifts for the children. One of them was Young-ju, and that was the first time she laid eyes on him. The next day, we see Ki-jun with his friend on the school field. The latter begins teasing him about Ji-won, saying that they're each other's first love and should be together. Just then, Ji-won overhears this conversation and blushes. That evening, she remembers kissing Ki-jun as a child and rushes to his house to confess her feelings. Upon arriving, he's surprised to see her and asks what she's doing there. Ji-won then tells him that she wants to start over again. However, just then, Ki-jun's grandfather arrives, so she panics and says she's there to learn carpentry from Grandpa. Following this, they head inside where the old man teaches them the art of woodworking. He seems impressed by how quickly our heroine learns. Later, Ki-jun notices that his grandfather isn't feeling well, so he suggests that he rest. Ji-won decides to head home, and Ki-jun joins her. When she asks why he's coming, he lies and says he's just heading to the supermarket. The next evening, he returns home with some food for his grandfather, only to find him lying unconscious on the floor. Panicked, he immediately rushes him to the hospital. Later, Ji-won arrives at his house and becomes concerned when she doesn't find anyone. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the doctor informs Ki-jun that his grandfather is doing fine. He then goes to see his grandpa, who is on a call with someone. He learns that the house in which they live must be auctioned due to financial problems. This makes him worried, but the old man assures him that he'll handle it. Moments later, Ki-jun receives a call from Ji-won, so he tells her about his grandfather. Our girl then hurriedly grabs some necessities and leaves for the hospital to stay by his side and comfort him. The next day, Ki-jun is still troubled by the thoughts of his grandfather. He is so distracted that he accidentally knocks off a sharp tool, almost injuring Ji-won. Later on the way home, So-young gives Young-ju a gift since it's his birthday. He then asks her what her birthday is, but she answers that she has no idea because she never knew her parents. Meanwhile, Ji-won is at a store when she notices someone struggling to enter. It turns out to be Jong, who has come to buy a birthday gift for his little brother. Later at home, Jong hands his brother the gift from Ji-won, and after they celebrate his birthday, Young-ju goes to his room to unwrap his presents. He gets excited when he finds Ji-won has sent him chocolates, so he nervously texts her a thank you message. Meanwhile, Ki-jun goes to the hospital to be with his grandfather. He starts to show him some affordable apartments, but the old man scolds him for house hunting instead of studying. Just then, Ji-won arrives and overhears their conversation. Later on their way home, she scolds Ki-jun for not sharing the situation earlier. She reveals that she has a spare flat in her house and invites him and his grandpa to move in with them. However, our hero refuses, saying he can handle the situation by himself. The following day at school, Young-ju notices Ji-won and goes to talk to her. She claims that she read his text last night, but couldn't respond as she was very busy. However, he insists that it's fine and thanks her for the gift. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Grandpa is about to be discharged. Seeing Ki-jun worried, he assures him that he has found a suitable place for them and that they don't need to pay a deposit up front. The latter is relieved to hear this, and they leave the hospital in high spirits. However, when they arrive at their new home, Ki-jun is shocked to learn that they're moving into Ji-won's place. It turns out that her mother had visited Grandpa in the hospital and offered him a place to live because he had helped them in the past. That evening, Ki-jun sits on the rooftop angry at Ji-won for not telling him about this earlier. She apologizes and says that they won't run into each other since they live on different floors, so he shouldn't be worried. The following morning, while on their way to school, the two decide to go in different directions to avoid any suspicion from their classmates. However, Young-ju notices them from a distance and feels a bit jealous. Later at school, the students gather to prepare for a carpentry competition. It will be held the next day, and the winning prize is 10 million won. So-young and Young-ju make up one team, Ji-won and Ki-jun another, and director Gumi's twin niece and nephew make up the third team. That evening, Yeonbai also gives So-young some candy to try to boost her confidence. It's revealed that the competition is crucial for her since she needs the money for college. Meanwhile, Ki-jun is nervous as he is also having financial problems. However, Ji-won says that he has worked very hard and suggests that he rest for the night. The scene then cuts to the competition where the students are arriving. So-young and Ji-won's respective teams build amazing benches, while the twins, who obviously have having no experience in carpentry, build a crappy one. It's so crappy that it breaks when they sit on it. Yet, due to director Gumi's influence, they are awarded first place. The next day at school, Ji-won checks out the bench they made for the competition and is pissed that her team didn't win. Just then, Young-ju arrives to cheer her up, saying she did an amazing job. Since our girl doesn't want to destroy the bench, she decides to bring it home, and Young-ju offers to help. They load the bench onto his bike and walk home together. Along the way, she confesses that she was the one who accidentally glued him to his seat. Shocked, Young-ju says that he was just about to track down and punish the culprit, but when she apologizes sweetly, he forgives her. Upon arriving home, he tries to take the bench inside. However, she asks him to leave, stating that her father will help her with it. Young-ju obliges and walks away, but he returns to tell her something. Unfortunately, at the same time, Ki-jun opens the door, and the two guys are shocked to see each other. Ji-won tries to explain the situation, but Young-ju says he'll talk about it later and leaves in a hurry. The next day at school, she approaches him and reveals that Ki-jun is living in her house as a tenant. However, he assures her that she doesn't need to explain anything to him. He then shares that after the competition, a director from a prominent furniture company approached him for a project. So he invites Ji-won to join him on this project, to which she gladly agrees. He also says that they will need 10 more people, and she assures him that she will talk to her classmates about it. Later, Young-ju approaches So-young and invites her to join the project as well. She's flattered but declines because she has started a new job. During class, a teacher announces that anyone interested in participating in the project should contact Ji-won. Hearing this, Ki-jun says that he wants to join as well, but Young-ju refuses to let him in. He says in front of the class that Ki-jun abandons everything when he becomes bored, just like he quit Taekwondo. The other students start laughing at him, which embarrasses him. Later, while heading home, So-young asks Young-ju why he hates Ki-jun so much, even though he seems to be a nice person. However, he avoids answering her question and instead takes her to his family restaurant. Ji-won also arrives shortly after, and the three of them sit down to eat. As they're engrossed in conversation, Young-ju's mother starts teasing our heroine. She reveals that her son won't let anyone touch the chocolates she gifted him. Hearing this, So-young becomes upset and asserts that she is Young-ju's girlfriend. Afterward, as Ji-won is about to leave, she asks Young-ju to include Ki-jun in their team. He asks if that's the only reason she came there, but she says she was also hungry. Despite her request, he insists that he won't participate in the project if Ki-jun is part of the team. The next day, students visit a traditional Korean house, Hanok, and are tasked to write about their experiences. Ji-won gets ready to leave, but she accidentally hurts her fingers while looking for a measuring tape. As a result, her father takes her to the clinic to get her wound treated. After that, she gets ready to leave again, but her mother scolds her. She tells Ji-won that she's not talented in carpentry and that she always does stupid things. This enrages our girl, and she screams at her mom to stop trying to control her life and storms out of the house. Meanwhile, Ki-jun notices this argument and feels sorry for Ji-won, so he follows her to the bus and gives her a measuring tape. Later, they arrive at a beautiful architectural site where they take lots of pictures and have a good time. Returning home tired, they drift off to sleep, with Ji-won resting her head on his shoulder. The following day, Director Gumi speaks with her nephew and learns that So-young was the one who forced her niece to make the false confession. This makes her suspect that So-young might be helping her boyfriend, Young-ju, who was not in class that day. Later, Director Gumi does a bit of investigation and finds out that Young-ju is the brother of Jeong, a former employee in one of her companies who was injured in a work accident. So she summons him to her office and asks him about the keychain found on the rooftop. When he doesn't respond, she gives him the keychain and orders him to return to his class. After he leaves, she summons the principal and tells him to find a way to expel Young-ju from school. In the following scene, Young-ju is at a store when he runs across the mother of his late friend, Min. They talk for a while, and the woman says that she's moving far away. She then says she appreciates Young-ju for sending her presents every year, even though Min is no longer alive. This surprises our hero because he never sends her anything, so he figures it must be Ki-jun. The following day at school, he remembers that it's Min's birthday, so he goes to a beach, the same place where his friend drowned. Sometime later, Ki-jun also arrives and he sits down with him. However, Young-ju becomes angry again and the two start fighting. He blames him for his friend's death and vows that he will never forgive him for his actions. In a flashback, we see that the three guys were very close as children and they all aspired to be Taekwondo champions. One day while hanging out by the beach, Ki-jun dared his friends to swim in the sea. So they all jumped into the water and played for a while. However, when they returned to land, Min was nowhere to be seen. Young-ju decided to go into the water to look for him, but Ki-jun intervened. He didn't want another friend to disappear as well. After this incident, Ki-jun was so devastated that he didn't come to Min's funeral, which enraged Young-ju. In the present, the two fight and are eventually arrested and taken to the police station. Shortly after, they're bailed out by Ki-jun's grandpa. The next day at school, students are shocked to see the two of them with bruises on their faces. Later in carpentry class, the teacher gets worried because they still need one more member for their project. Just then, Ki-jun arrives saying he wants to join in, and surprisingly, Young-ju does not object this time. Later on the way home, Young-ju asks Ji-won if she uses the bench she made. She tells him that she placed it on the rooftop where she can watch the sunset. She then offers to show him and takes him home. Following this, they sit on the bench and share a beautiful moment watching the sunset as Young-ju looks at her affectionately and realizes he's fallen in love with her. The next day, Ji-won's family goes on a holiday, leaving her alone. This gives our girl some private time, and she intends to use it to improve her carpentry skills. However, when she returns home from school, she realizes she's lost her keys. She quickly calls her mother, who advises her to stay at Ki-jun's place for the night. With no other choice, she goes to his place, where he is also alone. Turns out, Grandpa is working the night shift. Ki-jun then offers her some of his clothes, and they start working on their presentation. However, they soon get tired and end up falling asleep together on the desk. The next morning, Ki-jun wakes up early and goes to school, only to realize that he forgot his USB drive, which contains his presentation. So, he calls Ji-won and asks her to bring it to him. She agrees and starts searching for the USB on his desk. While searching, she finds a heart-shaped carving that she made for him when they were kids. She had actually used it to confess her feelings for him. This makes our girl angry and she decides to burn it, but finds another carved heart that was made for her. In it, he has confessed his feelings as well. Later, Ki-jun delivers a presentation in class, but he forgets to delete the last slide, which is a picture of Ji-won. Seeing this, the rest of the class starts teasing him, while Young-ju fumes. In the evening, our heroine goes to Ki-jun's apartment to return his clothes. When she learns that he hasn't arrived home, she decides to snoop around for a bit. She opens his laptop and finds several pictures of her. Just then, Ki-jun returns home, so Ji-won finally musters up the courage and confesses her feelings for him. He tries to respond, but she runs away before he can. At the same time, Young-ju meets with So-young and informs her that they need to end their fake relationship. This breaks her heart, however she pretends to be fine and accepts his decision. The next day, Ji-won assumes that Ki-jun doesn't like her, so she tries to stay away from him. However, she eventually bumps into him and he wants to talk to her about what she said last night. He asks if she really likes him, but she claims she was just joking before running away. Meanwhile, word of So-young and Young-ju's breakup spreads at school. Even though she acts like everything's fine, she's really hurting inside. Later during class, the teacher, Mr. Lee, invites students to present some inventions that will be useful for society. Ji-won shows her idea, which is a bench that can transform into a ladder, but the teacher isn't wowed. When it's Ki-jun's turn, he gets nervous because he hasn't prepared anything. However, he quickly sketches a simple idea for making a speaker from minimal objects. He says that he came up with this idea because his grandfather has difficulty hearing music during night shifts. Surprisingly, Mr. Lee is impressed and decides to move forward with Ki-jun's idea. While heading home, Min-soo cheers up Ji-won, who feels down because her idea wasn't approved. However, Young-ju says that he likes her idea and wants to work on it. This makes her girl happy, so she invites him to her house to work together. Following this, the two head to her place where Ji-won delivers a large amount of wood for their project. They then start working and have a great time together. Later on, when Ki-jun returns home, he is upset to see them together. He asks if they must work there, and Ji-won explains that there's no other place. Before leaving for home, Young-ju approaches Ki-jun and says he needs to talk about something. He questions his relationship with Ji-won and asks if he likes her, but our hero insists they're just friends. The following evening, we see Ji-won and Young-ju working on a project at school. During this, she asks him if he's okay after his breakup with So-young. He says he's okay because the relationship wasn't real. He then reveals that he ended things with So-young because he likes someone else. Hearing this, she gets excited and asks who the girl is, so Young-ju finally reveals that it's her. At that moment, Ki-jun arrives with food, overhears this conversation, and walks away devastated. Meanwhile, Ji-won is left speechless after hearing Young-ju's confession. He tells her that he's serious and gives her some time to think about it. She agrees, and they decide to call it a day. Elsewhere, Ki-jun worries about what she might have answered. His grandfather continues to mention her, which frustrates him even more. Later, when Ji-won arrives home, she asks Ki-jun why he didn't show up on the project, and he sarcastically says that he didn't want to bother them. In response, she reveals that she and Young-ju completed making his speaker and submitted it to the teacher. The next day, Ji-won walks to school in the rain, and Young-ju shares his umbrella with her. As they walk together, Ki-jun sees him from a distance and is upset. Later in class, a guy arrives to ask So-young out since she's now single. She declines, but he keeps bothering her and tries to hold her hand. This is when Young-ju intervenes and warns the guy to stay away from her. He then tries to talk to So-young, but she rudely tells him that she doesn't need his help. The next day after school, Young-ju calls Ji-won in front of everyone and asks to talk privately. After that, they walk alone, and he asks her about her decision. Our girl claims that he's a nice person, but she has a crush on someone else, whom she recently confessed to. She says that even though he doesn't like her, she hasn't been able to move on from that person. Hearing this, Young-ju says he understands her situation and promises not to bother her again. In the following scene, the director of the big company arrives and requests to see a demo of their speaker. The demonstration goes well, and he really likes their project. After that, the students pitch their product to elderly people with hearing problems. While returning home, Ki-jun talks to Young-ju and admits he overheard his conversation with Ji-won the other night. He just wants to know what she answered, but the latter refuses to tell him. He says that if he wants to know that badly, he should ask her himself. He also advises Ki-jun to be honest about his feelings if he genuinely likes her. Later at work, Ki-jun keeps thinking about Ji-won, but is unsure of his feelings, so he turns to his boss and asks if he might be in love. The latter suggests he close his eyes and think of the girl he likes, and Ki-jun thinks of Ji-won. After this, his boss tells him to imagine another guy with her, and he pictures Young-ju by her side. In his imagination, the two get close and proceed to kiss, so he freaks out and says he can't watch anymore. The next morning, Ki-jun notices that Ji-won is going to school early, so he rushes to catch up. Later at school, he stops his bicycle right in front of her and tells her that he wants to go out together, eat together, and go home together from now on. Our girl doesn't understand him, so he tells her that he likes her and wants to date her. Hearing this, she gets very happy and agrees to be his girlfriend. However, they decide to keep it a secret for the time being. That evening, the two arrive at a restaurant for their date. However, they feel uncomfortable, so they return home and start eating again. Once full, she asks him what's the difference between their former and current relationship. He then holds her hand and tells her that it feels different now. The next day at school, Director Gumi summons So-young to her office and says that she can help her gain admission to the best university on a full scholarship. So-young is confused about why she is suddenly trying to help her, but ultimately understands that the director wants something in return. True to her assumption, Gumi explains that she wants her to testify against Young-ju, claiming that she witnessed him tossing the flower pot. However, So-young says nothing and walks out of the room. Outside, Young-ju tries to talk to her and asks if they can be friends. However, she says she was never interested in being his friend and walks away. That night, Ji-won is at work when Young-ju comes to refill the claw machine. He invites her to grab something to eat, but she makes up an excuse that she's busy. After he leaves, Ki-jun arrives and they walk home holding hands. However, when they see some schoolmates, our girl gets nervous and tries to hide. Later, Ki-jun visits Young-ju's house and spills the beans about his new relationship. Surprisingly, the latter isn't angry and instead congratulates him. The following day at school, Ji-won's friends tell her that someone saw her holding hands with a guy last night. They ask who the guy is, but she gets nervous and tries to brush them off. Seeing this, Ki-jun holds her hand and announces in front of the entire class that they're together now. To their delight, everyone starts cheering for them. Later, as our lovely couple is heading home, they witness an elderly woman almost get hit by a motorcycle. Ji-won rushes over to help her, and the old woman explains that she's waiting for her grandson's school bus and she has to sit on the roadside despite having knee pain. Hearing this, Ji-won comes up with a plan. Later in class, she suggests making benches for the people who have to wait by the side of the road. Mr. Lee is impressed with this idea, and they decide to make it their new project. In the following scene, Young-ju helps Min's mother, who is getting ready to move to another city. Before she leaves, she gives him a medal and asks him to pass it on to Ki-jun. She tells him that after her son's funeral, Ki-jun showed up with a bronze medal and he was crying because he couldn't win the gold medal for Min. Hearing this, Young-ju feels bad, so he goes to see him that evening. He hands Ki-jun the medal and admits that all these years he hated him, thinking he didn't care about Min's death. He then apologizes to him, and the two best friends reconcile. Later, we see So-young waiting for a bus. Young-ju also arrives and sits down with her. He reveals that he'll be volunteering at her orphanage and asks if she's okay with it. In response, she says she's fine because everyone knows she's an orphan and he's been there before. Youngju is surprised and wonders how she remembers that because it was months ago. However, she gets bashful and doesn't respond to his question. Days later, Ji-won's team completes the bench, which they place on the roadside. Soon after, a man arrives with his son, and our girl explains that they have made the bench for people like him. The two then sit down on the bench and seem comfortable at first. However, the child starts jumping on the bench, which causes it to collapse. Due to this, the man gets angry and threatens to file a complaint against them, but Mr. Lee apologizes and ultimately calms him down. Later, Mr. Lee inspects the bench and discovers that the wood wasn't the right kind and that the screws were also loose. Despite the letdown, he advises Ji-won not to worry as they will try again. That evening, she sits on the rooftop, still upset over what happened. Ki-jun calls her and says that he'll come to her, but she says she wants to be alone. Sometime after, the grandpa arrives on the rooftop, and it turns out that Ki-jun has told him everything. Ji-won then tells him that she's not talented and maybe she should give up. However, he comforts her and assures her that she will do better next time and that he will help her in the process. The following morning, Youngju arrives at the orphanage along with other volunteers. The director of the place recognizes him as So-young's boyfriend from the social media post. She greets him warmly and they eat a meal together, during which she tells him stories of So-young's childhood. Youngju appears to be interested in knowing more about her. Before leaving, the two spend some time together and she apologizes for not informing the orphanage director about their breakup. However, he tells her that it's okay and he gives her some bookmarks on which he has written words of encouragement. Meanwhile, Ki-jun tries to cheer up Ji-won, so they watch a movie and grab some grub. They seem to be having a good time, but they begin to panic when Ji-won's father knocks on the door. It turns out he's come to fix the sink, so she quickly hides while Ki-jun answers the door. When Dad finally leaves, he finds our hero cramped up from hiding in the cupboard. He carries her, and when he tries to stretch her legs, she accidentally kicks him, and they crack up. Ki-jun then tells her that he hasn't felt this happy in a long time. However, their happiness ends when he receives a call from the hospital asking him to come urgently. The two then rush to the hospital and are devastated to learn that his grandfather has passed away. Following this incident, Ji-won's family makes funeral arrangements for Ki-jun's grandfather. Throughout the ordeal, she remains by his side and comforts him. After everyone leaves, Ki-jun stares at his grandfather's picture and recalls his childhood memories with him. Later, Youngju also arrives to be with him, and the two of them spend the night in the funeral home. The next day, Ki-jun returns home and cries thinking about his grandfather. He decides to skip school and stay home all day, feeling miserable. Meanwhile, at school, So-young speaks with Mr. Lee about Director Gumi's threat. She says that she likes Youngju and doesn't want to hurt him, but she also worries about her future. Mr. Lee then advises her to do what she believes is right. Later at home, Youngju's family discusses Jeong's upcoming trial against the company where he injured his legs. It turns out Director Gumi has threatened to dismiss him from school if they don't drop the lawsuit, so his family considers giving up. However, Youngju says he doesn't care about school and insists they continue with the trial. Following this, he meets with Mr. Lee, who updates him on So-young's situation. However, Youngju insists that she tell the truth and secure her future. They then discuss Jeong's trial, and Mr. Lee tells him not to worry because he's willing to testify in his favor. He reveals that when Jeong was working for that company, he was the on-site manager and witnessed everything. So he is now determined to help Jeong, even if it means risking his job. After that, Youngju goes to see Ki-jun, who is still mourning the loss of his grandfather. He says that he wants to stay with him and support him for a few days, but Ki-jun insists he's fine and asks him to leave, but the latter refuses and begins preparing dinner for them. The next morning, he wakes up early and makes breakfast for them. They then get ready for school and leave home together. Later, Youngju talks to So-young and asks her to testify against him. He says he doesn't care about school and he won't be upset if he's expelled. Later, So-young meets with Gumi and agrees to testify against Youngju. This makes the director happy, but So-young says that she will expose the truth about her favoritism towards her niece and nephew. She says that despite being the best student, she never got the recognition she deserved because of nepotism and corruption. This makes the director very angry, so she shouts at her to leave. Next, it's the day of Jeong's trial and Mr. Lee testifies on his behalf, stating that a machine malfunction caused the accident and that the company is ultimately responsible. He shows a text message where he complained multiple times to the company director about the faulty machine. With this, Jeong successfully wins the trial, and Youngju is happy. However, when Mr. Lee returns to school, Director Gumi immediately fires him. Soon, the word of his dismissal spreads throughout the school. Ji-won declares in front of the class that they cannot sit quietly and must act against injustice. To prepare for the protest, they plan to meet at Ki-jun's house later. Meanwhile, Director Gumi's niece angrily confronts her for firing Mr. Lee. She claims that after much struggle, she had finally made some friends, but her aunt has ruined it once again. In response, the cunning director says that since she doesn't have any children, she considers her niece to be her own daughter and will go to any length to protect her. The next day, Ji-won and the other students protest against Mr. Lee's unfair dismissal. The principal scolds them and tells them to go to class, but they refuse to budge. Surprisingly, even Director Gumi's niece joins the protest against her aunt. When Mr. Lee sees this, he gets emotional and decides to stand with his students. Later, Director Gumi's niece talks to So-young and Young-ju, claiming that the board of directors haven't approved Mr. Lee's resignation. She reveals that the board meeting documents were forged, and the real ones are hidden in a drawer in her aunt's office. That evening, Young-ju grabs a hammer and is determined to break into Director Gumi's office. Meanwhile, Ki-jun and Ji-won are in carpentry class. She has been avoiding carpentry since the bench incident. However, after some encouragement from Ki-jun, she is finally ready to give it another try. Meanwhile, So-young repeatedly texts Young-ju, but he doesn't respond. Fearing that he might have gone to the school, she quickly calls Ki-jun and informs him about the situation. Our hero then rushes there and stops Young-ju in the nick of time. He begs him not to do it, as it will lead to a criminal record. Slowly, Young-ju comes to his senses, and the two walk away. The next morning when the students arrive at school, they notice a police car parked outside. They learn that someone broke into the director's office the night before. Inside, Gumi is in a state of panic, and she desperately shouts at the principal to catch the culprit and find the missing notebook. Moments later, a teacher enters the classroom and questions Ki-jun about whether he was at the school the previous night. In a flashback from last night, we see a mysterious person breaking into Director Gumi's office and taking a notebook from her drawer. In the present, Ki-jun is speechless and unsure of what to say. Sensing his distress, his friends try to help him by claiming that he was with them. However, the police still take him in for questioning. In the next scene, the cops show Ki-jun a video of him entering the school the night before and ask him what he was up to. He says that he's innocent and was only there for schoolwork. The cops don't believe him, but suddenly, Director Gumi arrives and claims that although there was a break-in, nothing was stolen. It turns out that the stolen notebook contains proof of her corruption and shady dealings. She's worried that the cops will find out about it, so she acts like everything is normal and sends them away. Afterward, Director Gumi calls Ki-jun to her office and insists he return her notebook. He claims he hasn't stolen anything, but she accuses him of acting on Mr. Lee's orders. Soon after, Young-ju enters to defend his friend and says that they were together last night. However, Director Gumi threatens that if they don't return her notebook, she will expel them both. She also demands that Young-ju call his family for a meeting to discuss his future. Later, the boys share the information with Ji-won and So-young. Seeing Director Gumi so upset, they realize the notebook contains damning information. After that, the four of them skip classes and go home to plot how to expose Director Gumi. Since they lack clear evidence, they decide to disclose what they've witnessed at school. They reach out to a reporter who agrees to hear their story. After this, the four of them meet in a cafe and share their story of injustice and bias in their school. The reporter is pleased with the information and promises to publish it soon. Meanwhile, we're introduced to a school board member named Shin who meets with the principal. It turns out that he's the son of the school's founder, who is currently in a coma. The principal reveals that he was the one who stole the diary and shows him some pictures of its contents. He's also aware that Director Gumi is Shin's aunt and threatens to expose her unless he's appointed the new director. Surprisingly, Shin agrees to remove his aunt, claiming he never liked her. In the evening, Ki-jun receives a call from his mother who abandoned him years ago to live in Canada with her new husband. Now that his grandfather has passed away, she requests that he come live with her. However, our hero doesn't respond and simply hangs up. The next day, the group discovers that their article still hasn't been published, which makes them worried. So, they reach out to the reporter to inquire about the delay. Unfortunately, the latter apologizes and says that he can't publish the article due to pressure from higher authority. Meanwhile, Director Gumi also hears this news and becomes smug. She gets ready for the parent-teacher meeting, and Young-ju's family soon arrives at the school. However, just as the meeting is about to begin, a live stream starts featuring an interview with Director Gumi's niece and Mr. Lee. They uncover all her shady actions and injustices. Due to this, the board members immediately fire her. She argues with her nephew Shin, saying she won't leave. However, he takes out her notebook and threatens to expose her unless she complies. He also reveals that the principal was the one who brought all of this to his attention. The following day, a public meeting is organized and the students are excited because a new director will be announced. The principal is also pleased, thinking that he will be appointed the new director. However, Shin arrives on stage and announces that there has been a lot of corruption and bribery at the school. So he decides that they can no longer function in this manner and announces that the school will close permanently. This news leaves both teachers and students utterly shocked. In the evening, Ki-jun and Ji-won head home worrying about their school's future. Our girl is filled with regret and believes that they should have just kept their mouths shut. Out of the blue, Ki-jun's mother arrives from Canada and tries to convince him to come live with her. She says that she's already spoken with their husband as well, who is happy to welcome him in. However, he is hesitant to say yes because of Ji-won. He tells her that they decided to part ways long ago and she shouldn't worry about him. Mom understands his concern, but at the same time, she doesn't want to leave him alone. The next day, many students and teachers sign a petition against the closing of the school, but it doesn't seem to help. Meanwhile, in a desperate attempt, Ki-jun's mom approaches Ji-won and initiates a conversation. She begs her to convince her son to move to Canada. Later, our heroine speaks with him and advises him to go with his mother. She tells him not to be worried about her, as they can have a long-distance relationship. Ji-won tries to appear cheerful and encourages him to leave, even though she is devastated on the inside. Eventually, this convinces Ki-jun, and he agrees to go with his mother. Meanwhile, Young-ju meets So-young and tries to tell her that he likes her. She realizes what he's getting at, so she interrupts him and says that she can't be in a relationship right now because she needs to focus on her studies. This upsets him, but he understands and accepts her decision. A few days later, Shin's father recovers and wakes from his coma. When he learns about the school's situation, he immediately heads there. Upon seeing the petition signed by numerous students, teachers, and parents, he cancels his son's decision and allows the school to continue running, making everyone happy. He also expresses his gratitude to the students for their efforts in fighting corruption and helping the school. In the next scene, So-young invites Young-ju to spend time together, implying that she can't stay away from him. They go to the movies, dine out, and take casual stroll. Although she insists it's not a date, deep down, she also feels the same way about him. Meanwhile, Ki-jun is preparing to leave for Canada with his mother. He and Ji-won say their final goodbyes and tearfully hug. He then gives her a scarf as a gift, and she gives him a box, but asks him to wait until he reaches Canada to open it. The following day, Ki-jun and his mother bid farewell to Ji-won's family and leave. While on the bus, he recalls his grandmother's advice to always do what his heart desires. He then opens the box gifted by Ji-won and finds a carved heart inside with a message, telling him to be happy and assuring him that she will always be by his side. Following this, he recalls his memories with her and realizes she was always with him in good times and bad. Elsewhere, when Ji-won finally falls asleep after hours of crying, she receives a call from Ki-jun. She asks him if he's reached Canada, but he says he's cold and asks her to come outside. To her surprise, he has decided to stay, and the couple kisses to celebrate their reunion. The story then shifts to a few months later, where Ji-won receives a job offer that requires her to move away from home. After discussing it with Ki-jun, they decide to have a long-distance relationship since it allows her to pursue her dreams. So-young also achieves her dream of getting into one of the best universities. In the final scene, Young-ju musters up the courage to confess his feelings for So-young. To his delight, she confesses her own feelings, and they officially start dating. The show ends on graduation day, where everyone comes together to celebrate their last day of high school.